There's a very specific frustration that shows up in conversations between deeply religious people and those who aren't. It's that moment when someone explains with total confidence how their faith is the answer to life, and the person listening just doesn't feel anything. No revelation, no curiosity sparked, just a kind of quiet resistance. That's not stubbornness. It's something deeper. Religious people often approach conversations about belief with the idea that everyone has a God-shaped hole inside them, that belief is a natural state. And doubt, questioning, or disbelief, these are seen as conditions to be fixed. So, when that framework meets someone who simply doesn't see any need for faith at all, there's a kind of communication breakdown that can't be patched with better arguments or more persuasive sermons. Part of this failure comes from how people are wired to process belief in the first place. Faith isn't really about evidence. It's about trust. Trust in a narrative, in a tradition, in an authority. But when someone doesn't grant that trust from the start, no amount of emotional stories, ancient texts, or spiritual testimonies will shift anything. That's not a shortcoming. It's a different mode of understanding the world. Most arguments for religion are built on the idea that people already believe in something, that they want certainty, that they're afraid of death, that they need purpose. But those things aren't universal. Some people aren't terrified of not having an afterlife. Some find comfort in the idea that life is finite. It makes experiences sharper, not emptier. If you're not scared of the unknown, a promise of heaven doesn't hold the same appeal. It becomes a solution to a problem you never felt you had. And a common move religious people make is to appeal to morality. The idea is that without a God, there's no objective right or wrong. But this assumes that people need rules handed down from outside themselves in order to treat each other well. In reality, studies show that secular societies often have lower crime rates, higher literacy, better education, and more trust in institutions. Countries like Sweden, Norway, and Japan consistently rank among the most peaceful and cooperative societies on Earth, and their rates of religious belief are among the lowest. Moral behavior isn't born from belief in divine punishment. It comes from empathy, from social contracts, from understanding that well-being isn't a religious gift, it's a human project. That's something that can be deeply grounding. You help others not because you're afraid of hell, but because their happiness matters as much as yours. Many religious people assume that what convinces them will convince others, but conversion doesn't work like that. Emotional experiences during worship, personal stories of healing, moments of divine insight, these are all intensely private and subjective. They can feel overwhelming to the person experiencing them, but meaningless to someone else. In neuroscience, this is partly explained by something called temporal lobe epilepsy. Some individuals report religious visions and intense spiritual feelings during episodes, which raises an uncomfortable question. If your most sacred feeling can be mimicked by electrical misfires in your brain, is it still proof of anything beyond yourself? Then there's the Bible or other sacred texts. Quoting them to someone who doesn't already accept their authority is like bringing in a character witness that the jury doesn't recognize. It's not persuasive, it's circular. You're trying to prove the truth of a belief by referring to the belief itself. And for someone who values logic or empirical evidence, that's not compelling, it's confusing. Another common approach is the personal relationship with God angle, but relationships require two-way interaction. For someone who has never experienced the presence of a deity, the idea that they're in rebellion or denial doesn't land. It feels like being blamed for not receiving a phone call that was never made. The silence. There's also the fact that many atheists, or more accurately, many non-believers, have read religious texts more thoroughly than the average believer. Pew Research data shows that atheists tend to score higher on religious knowledge tests than religious people themselves. That's not about arrogance, it's about understanding what they're rejecting. Often disbelief isn't a result of ignorance, it's the result of reading everything carefully and still finding nothing convincing. Another factor is how religion tries to universalize highly specific human experiences. If someone feels despair or awe or love, religious traditions often claim those emotions as evidence of the divine. But those same feelings can emerge in nature, in music, in human connection, without pointing to anything supernatural. Just because something is powerful doesn't mean it's proof. The sense of transcendence is not exclusive to religious practice. Sometimes the argument turns historical. People point to the beauty of cathedrals, the legacy of religious art, the impact of scripture on law and culture. But being influential isn't the same as being true. Alchemy influenced chemistry. Astrology influenced astronomy. Ideas can shape history and still be based on incorrect assumptions. Religion has been a powerful force, yes, but power isn't proof. Influence isn't insight. A less common but very revealing tactic used in conversion is fear, the threat of eternal punishment, hell, condemnation. But here's where the logic breaks down completely. If you don't already believe in the system, the punishments don't hold any weight. Telling someone they'll be judged by a God they don't believe in is like warning them about fines from a government that doesn't exist. It just doesn't register. It feels manipulative rather than moral. A more subtle, but equally ineffective approach is pity. The idea that non-believers are lost, incomplete, or missing out on something essential. This sentiment doesn't offend so much as it reveals a misunderstanding. You can't miss what you don't value. If you're not seeking salvation, you're not suffering from its absence. And perhaps most importantly, belief isn't a choice. You can't will yourself to believe something you find unconvincing. Try believing that the moon is made of cheese. Try believing in a God you've never felt or seen or heard from. You can pretend, you can go through motions, but belief itself isn't about effort. It either forms or it doesn't, based on your experiences, your reasoning, and your sense of the world. That's why religious people often feel frustrated. They think belief is something you can decide on, like picking a team or joining a club. But for someone who doesn't find the premise believable, there's nothing to convert to. There's also a growing recognition that religion answers fewer questions than it asks. Where did God come from? Why so many contradictions in sacred texts? Why are miracles so conveniently unprovable? Why is faith required for salvation but not for gravity? A system that requires belief without evidence can't easily win over someone whose standards for truth require testable claims. Not because they're stubborn, but because they've learned to value questioning over certainty. That doesn't mean religious people are foolish. It means their framework is built differently. But trying to convert someone outside that framework often feels like speaking different languages. You're not arguing about the same reality. You're defining words like truth and evidence in fundamentally different ways. It's also worth pointing out that many non-believers have deconverted from religion. They've already been inside the system. They've prayed. They've cried out for answers. They've tried to believe, and nothing came back. That absence isn't just disappointing, it's definitive. It closes the door. Not because they're angry, not because they're rebellious, but because they looked sincerely and found nothing convincing. Sometimes silence says more than noise, and for those who no longer believe, the world is full of meaning, just not the kind handed down from ancient texts. It's in the small kindnesses, the shared laugh, the unscripted love, the long walks under stars that don't care whether you believe in them or not. That's not emptiness, that's freedom. And no amount of preaching can compete with the quiet satisfaction of knowing you don't need to be saved from something that never felt wrong in the first place.